Hi guys, welcome to Jamin's little 101 on being a writer, publisher, etc, etc. Okay, so I've decided to split it into three parts because I know each person will be at a different place in this writing, publishing experience, and that way you can just pick up wherever you want, whichever video is going to suit you the best. So the first part will be writing the book. For those people that want to know the process I go through from the first idea, etc. The second part will be what to do once your book is complete or pretty much complete. And the third part will be the publishing and some of the marketing that I do and all that entails. Okay, so let's start with part one, writing your book. Okay, firstly, you obviously need to decide what sort of genre you're going to write in. I went with what I was interested in and decided to figure out ideas within that genre. So that was obviously fantasy, paranormal, sci-fi. Have a look on Amazon or any of the retailers. You can go through and find all the genres, and then they go down into even further subgenre categories, down to a very small audience, some of them. For example, you could look at fantasy, then it might go down to werewolf or urban or witches, wizards, gods, myths and legends. It goes right down into all different ones. So you'll see that on Amazon. You can keep going down into your category. My suggestion would be to look for something that you're interested in, but that is also a sellable market. So have a look at how many books are in there. Have a look at how many of those books might be in the top 100 of Amazon or the teen and young adult of Amazon, whatever genre you're looking at. Have a look, because it's fantastic to want to write about underwater duck romances where they raise duck farms or something, but you might not find that there's a large audience there. Of course, you're not going to have huge competition from other authors, but if you don't have a large audience, it's very difficult to make a living from it. And I assume at the end of the day, most of you want to make a living being a writer, and therefore you've got to be able to sell books. So look for something that you enjoy reading, but that is popular as well. Lots of writers say, well, I could only write what I love. It doesn't matter if people buy it or not. That's fantastic. If you're that writer and you don't care if people buy it or not, great. Go with whatever you're interested in. So basically, yes, find your genre, figure out what you want to write, and you need to have an idea. Where I pull my ideas from probably is the countless years I've spent reading. I'm a massive reader. I'm a fast reader. I can read a book a day, no problem. Most nights when I put my girls to bed, I lay down with them while they go to sleep, and I read on my Kindle, and most nights I finish a book. It's really hard to find new great things to read, but I'm a very fast reader, and I suppose that's where my ideas have come from. So I start with an idea. There's two types of writers. There's plotters and there's pantsers. Plotters are the sort of person that needs to know basically where their whole story is going. They will plot it out chapter by chapter. If it's a 3 books trilogy or 10 books, they will know the beginning, the middle, and the end. They will often know 10 to 12 points in between each of those. And you know what? That's great. That's probably the best way to do it. And if you deviate off your plot line, that's no problem. But it's very helpful for things like writer's block, because if you get to the point where you don't know where you're going, you have a look back at your notes and you can see where you need to go, and that can often help you fill in that part that you're struggling with. I'm not a plotter. I'm a pantser. I have written 12 books now, and I have to say that almost none of them had any plotting before I wrote. The Walker Saga I wrote with the most basic of idea of 7 worlds, 7 half-walkers, the big baddie guys who would be over the whole story, and the basic information of each world. So I knew I wanted each world to be quite different from the other, and then that would of course make the inhabitants quite different from each other, because they would have to be adapted to live in that sort of particular environment of their world. That was it. So every little minor plot point in between there, everything, some of you might not have read it, so I won't go too spoilery, but basically that all came as I write. I'm the sort of person that seems to be lacking of all imagination when I try and plot something, and yet when I sit down and I put my fingers on the keyboards and I just start writing, it just flows out of me. Some of the most craziest ideas and what I think are the best things in my stories came out of nowhere. I mean, and that will happen even if you're a plotter, but you need to discover what sort of writer you are. See, some people can't do what I do because you either write something that doesn't have a real storyline, you write yourself into a corner, you can't figure out where to go next, and you never pick it up again. I would encourage all of you who are trying to write a book, who are writing for the first time, to plot out your story. Really sit down and think about it. And the best thing you could do is, if you can find someone to be a sounding board to, start discussing it. You will be amazed at how many ideas, when you start discussing it backwards and forwards, will come to you, will come to the other person. And then you can just start making these basic plot points that will help you get through the story. Have your beginning, have your middle, and have your end. How most stories start or go is you've got your normal person who's living their life, and you want your action, or so what happens is something comes into their world and changes it, and then that starts the whole thing. It's like a domino effect. So whatever comes into the world and changes it, and then the rest of the story is the ricochet effect of that. So you want that to happen really fast. So if we take Dragon Marked, for example, Jessa lives a normal life in Stratford with her pack. This is 22 years, and nothing much has happened besides, the few normal things of life. Within the first chapter, at the end of it, we've got her mother and her sister, who she never knew she had, appearing, and basically everything unravels from there. So this is the first thing that happens to her that is something that has disrupted her normal world. And then the next part, she's Dragon Marked, and then the whole long-reaching effect of that. So that changes her life. It changes her course, her future, and she has to go on a new path then. And so basically that's your story. So you need to know what comes in, you need to have your protagonist, your antagonist. You need to have a romance if you're going to have it. So plot out your characters. It is really important to have well-rounded characters. A lot of mine I do have reasonably well-rounded before I write, and then so much more of them comes in the story. And a lot of my minor characters I don't have any plans for. They just appear when they appear, and some of them become major characters. Say even in the Walker saga, Fury, to me, sort of jumped out as such a stronger character than some of the other half-walkers. Even though I love them all, for some reason she just forced her way into the story a lot more than them. And you'll have characters that do that. Well, you think they're going to do something and they will just do whatever they want. I'm not even kidding. And sometimes you just got to go with that, because I know for a lot of people, Fury became one of their favourite characters as well. And that's just what happens. So basically, yes, so you need to figure out what sort of writer you are. And I would encourage plotting, because I think that a lot of people suffer from writer's block. And when you do, I think plotting is something that helps you a lot. I'm not someone that suffers from writer's block too much. I actually have a little bit of it going on right now. But I think that what it is writing is a skill like any other. You need to do it every single day. If you get up and you try and set yourself time to do it. Now, I know most of you work, and this is just something you're trying to do around children and life and work and families and partners and everything. That's how I was when I first started. But what you need to say is, every day when my kids go to bed or before they wake up in the morning, for 30 minutes, I'm going to sit and I'm going to write. I'm going to write whatever. It does not matter. Put words down just to get in the habit of writing, because it is a habit. And the best way to get your books down and to not waffle all over the place is to write every day. And at the moment, I haven't written for a little bit. We went away for camping for a couple of days, and so I always find when I haven't written for a few days, getting back into it is difficult for me. And I get what is like a writer's block, where I come across to my study or to my office to write, and I watch YouTube videos. And that'll happen. And sometimes you just have to say, okay, my aim, I think you need to be quite strict with yourself if you want to be a writer. If you want it to be a job, and if you eventually want it to be a job, you have to be strict. You have to be disciplined. I say to myself, I'm going to write 2,000 words a day. I look at my word count when I sit down, and I go. And then sometimes I go, oh, that's great. I must have done heaps of words. Yep, 400 words. Like, seriously, that was the hardest work of my life, for 400 words. And other times I look down and I have 4,000, and I feel like I barely wrote anything. And that's great, because if you try and give yourself an average of 2,000 words a day, and I mean, that's reasonably high. Start with 500. Just say, I want to write 500, 100. I don't care what it is. Set yourself a number, and it will help you to try and write it. If you look at your number, your word count every day, set yourself a number and try and stick with it. If I ever have any sort of writer's block, I just write. So when I say I want 2,000 words a day, if I'm having a writer's block moment, I'm happy with 50 words. Eventually, if I come over every day and I write, that will disappear and I'll get back to my decent amount of words. You just have to write. There's no other way. It's easy to procrastinate, and I am someone that procrastinates a lot. I know for a lot of authors, they turn off their internet, they turn off all their social media because you can get easily distracted. I can be like, oh, I'm going to cross to write, and I only have a few hours because that's how long my husband watches my kids, and then I go back and have lunch with them. And I can want to be on Facebook for half of that time, which, for an author who's already published is important as well because I interact and I socialize with my readers, and that's a really important thing. But otherwise, it's just procrastination, and you need to be disciplined. It's hard because I think writers are like artists, and we have a bit of a flighty personality and brain, and we can get easily distracted by things. But that's where your plotting comes in important as well, because you can just say, no, I want to get to this point. I want to get to this word count. Okay, so some of the questions I had was, where do I find inspiration? So I find inspiration probably from lots of areas. Like with the Supernatural Prison, I love books that have a mix of supernatural races, and I really love shifter books. So I wanted to write one that was about that. And I started thinking about, how could I be different? What's an interesting concept I haven't really read much about? And the supernatural prisons was what I found to be quite interesting. I kept thinking, in most of the books I read, there's no prisons for the supernatural people. They're dealt with then and there, or basically they're kind of lawless. Their societies are always on the fringe, and they just kind of exist. And, you might have bounty hunters, or you might have those but to have like a structured prison system, it kind of like piqued my interest. So then I started thinking, well, how would that work? And so that's where it started. But basically, you need to latch onto a few key concepts that you really enjoy and try and work a story around it. For me, of course, a lot of my story has a romance. I love romance stories. It's what I've always read, and I don't think I could really write one that didn't have some sort of a strong romantic element. But I also wanted to say the Supernatural Prison to be quite actiony based, quite fast paced. So, the romance is there, but the first book, it doesn't even have a kiss in it, and yet there's so much romantic tension. So you can build a story with lots of romance, but not make it drown the story either. So you need to figure, if you're just writing a contemporary romance, then romance is your storyline. How the characters get together and whatever obstacles they face, that's your storyline. But see, in Supernatural Prison, that's a sort of a side part of the storyline. The storyline itself, or the drama itself, is not based around the romance. It's based around something else. So it just depends what sort of book you write. So the process of writing once I have an idea. So like I said, that's my idea. And my process for writing then would be to sit down, to flesh out a few of the main characters that I really am interested in. So for me, it was the Compass, Quads, and Jessa. And then I had to build the world around it, because obviously you have to round your characters. So look at the way your own life is. Parents, grandparents, we all have family trees. We all have individual traits. Give them their looks so you know clearly in your head what they look like when you're writing. Give them some personality traits and let the rest develop if you want. But at least you know then what sort of person they are. If you have well-rounded characters, your storyline will be well-rounded, because characters build stories. It's all about them. Obviously I said I'm a pantser. So then once I have the basic idea of the characters and a basic idea, the rest comes. Now, I knew the dragon marked books. The dragon marked wasn't something that I knew I was going to write about until I was at that point where I decided to make her and her twin have something special. That's the reason they were separated out. So I actually didn't have any idea that was going to be part of it. I did not know that she was going to be a dragon shifter. I did not know. I knew she was going to be something special, and I had some ideas, but what I actually had ideas for didn't pan out when I wrote it, because it just didn't fit. Again, I don't encourage you to do it this way, because it can be very easy to write yourself into a book where you just think, oops, I don't really know how I'm going to get out of this situation now. Luckily, in a lot of fantasy and paranormal, there's always ways around it. Magic and the like, eases your way through. But if you just give yourself a few decent plot points and know where you're going, it will make life a lot easier for you. So once I have the idea, I basically just sit down and write. And I write from start to finish. I don't deviate. I tend to do about 3,000 to 5,000 words per chapter, but there is no hard and fast rules on this. You write what you want. I think in the old days they liked chapters to be about 5,000 words, and some people stick to that. Some people have 2,000 word chapters. They like short ones. Write what feels right. You know, and one of my editors said to me once, "Oh, it's better if you can have all your chapters quite even. You know, not really long ones and really short ones." But again, I don't believe there's any rules like that anymore. You write what works. When a chapter naturally ends, you can find it. But for me, I love to end a chapter because I feel like, yes, I've finished something. So I like to do like 4,000 to 5,000. And when I see I'm getting near that 4,000 to 5,000, I start to kind of wrap my chapter up and then I go to the next chapter. There's nothing better than like finishing a chapter and starting another one. I don't know. It's just a sense of achievement, accomplishment. It feels like you did something that day in the book, even if you only wrote 50 words to finish the chapter. So I write that. I had someone else ask, how long should a book be? Again, completely up to you. But it could affect how you price the book or how people feel about it, so you have to keep that in mind. I think generally under 50,000 words is not considered a novel. It's considered like a novella or a short story. I write 70 to 100,000 in average. I mean, Earth of the Walker Saga was 110, but that was quite long for me. The Supernatural Prison ones are all around 90 to 95. My Walker Saga sit between 75 and 95. What you need to look at is the genre you're writing in. Every genre has kind of an average that people like. Young adult tends to be a little shorter than some of them, but if you're writing historical romances, a lot of them are like 150 to 200,000 word massive Bible books. So it really depends. But again, there's no rules. That's the best thing about this new writing industry and world. There are no rules. I have author friends who write young adult 140,000 words and are extremely popular, and people still complain they're too short. Other author friends that write 60,000 words sell them for the same price, and obviously, it's going to be a lot quicker to write, and still have the same audience base and are just as popular. So it's going to suit your story, and the best thing you can do is not shortchange yourself. So write what needs to be, and then in the editing process, you'll probably find you'll lose a lot of words. Nowadays, I gain words in the editing process, but when I first started First World, I had to learn how to whittle away a lot of the excess words. Basically, my problem was I was in love with my own words. I just couldn't let any of them go. I figured that you needed to know every single one of those words because then I would lose something from the storyline. It was only after I was told in no uncertain terms that Abby was the most annoying person that ever lived, and that if they had to hear her chatter one more time, they would probably punch her in the face. That I looked at it quite in a different light and said, yeah, you know what? She probably does chatter a bit much there. I'll cut some of that out. And you know what? Once I started to cut, it was amazing. I just cut, and it was like a lump of clay. And then all of a sudden, this statue started to appear, an actual story with just enough information, and it wasn't bogged down by so many useless words. So probably I cut 10,000 words, and I think for a lot of you, you'll find that you might have to cut excess words. There's some of you that probably write, I write very fast-paced with sort of just enough description so you know what I'm talking about, but I don't over-describe anything. Which I know can annoy some people because they're like, I wanted more from that. But I think for the vast majority of us who read really fast and, in this kind of throwaway sort of book world we're in, which is sad, but it's true, you do enjoy those books where you can just fly through them really quickly. That's not to say there's not that place out there for those who like a more poetic, prosy kind of really wordy description of things. I mean, for me, I don't need 8 paragraphs on the leaves turning different colours through the seasons, because for the most part I've lived through that. I understand what happens when the leaves change from green to gold to brown to red and fall from the trees and go into the ground, like whatever happens. But some authors do like to put that sort of detail in there, and I know that that works great for them. So again, find what works for you, but too many words is not a good thing. If you have a 150,000 word young adult novel, you need to look long and hard at whether one, it should be split into 2 books, or 2, whether you just have too many words in there and some of them can come out. Don't split a book just because you think it's too long. Don't do it. Readers detest authors who are doing these serial books now, where they're just trying to split one novel into 8 parts and still charge you full price for them. I don't particularly like them. I tend to not read short stories too much because there's just never enough there. And I know a lot of people consider some of the lengths of what I write to be short stories, but I mean, I write the amount that was always suggested as the full young adult. Young adult was 55 to 75 generally, but I liked the upper young adult kind of area, so I went for a higher word count than that. So yes, you can write whatever word count you want, and in the next few videos I will talk about pricing and royalties and the such, and how you might run into some troubles with that, because people don't really like to pay full price for short stories, and that will be something you might have to consider. Of course, you can charge whatever you want for them, but you might run into some problems with that. But that's something I'll discuss in the future video. Okay, what do I write on, or what program do I use? I use Word. Very simple, I know. Lots of authors use different ones. I think Scrivener, I don't even know if that's how you say it, but that's a really popular one, and it gives you some, you can map out your story and keep your notes there. And I mean, I've bought it and it sits on my computer and I've never even opened it yet. For now, I'm just staying with what works, and that's Word. And like I said, I open it up, I write chapter 1, and I start from start to finish, and I don't stop. I don't deviate. It can be difficult at times because what I wrote in the first chapter, basically, it can take me 3 months to finish it, and it could take you guys 6 months or a year or even longer. You don't always remember what you wrote in the first chapter, so you might find that some of your details are a little bit out, but that's something you fix when you go through the editing process, which is what I'll talk about in the next video. So for now, you need to find your genre, you need to figure out your storyline, you need to definitely develop characters and write them down, and you can picture them in your mind. They have to be really strong for you. Their personalities will morph and change, but you need to have a really, really strong start with that. I would say plot out as much as you can, because it will help you with writer's block, and you must be disciplined. So you must try and make time every day to write. You must try and give yourself goals and stick with them. Writing is really hard work. Before I was a full-time writer, I always wrote, I started writing first when I was 21. It took me about 5 years, but that was just on and off writing. I wouldn't pick it up for 6 months, and I'd just write a little bit here and there. And then I had my first daughter, and I was home a lot more, and I decided to sit down and really try and write First World out and, get it where it was supposed to go. Fun fact, it was in third person when it first started. Ellie ended up being the Empress and marrying Lucas. Just a whole bunch of things. There was no walkers, there was no other worlds. It was a single standalone book. I mean, this was what I wrote when I first wrote, and that basically was just me learning how to write over and over and over and over again. But then when I sat down and got serious about it, I already had the walker stuff sort of there then in the worlds. So I sent it, so I finished it, did that part where I went through and cut all the excess words out, and then I was reasonably happy with it. I still had no idea. I've never done a writer's class, nothing. I hadn't been in school for a long time. I'd done university, but that was in sciences, so that wasn't something where you did a lot of creative writing. So I sent the first chapter to an editor. I just found a local editor just to see what they said. I prepared myself for some harshness, because you do have to have a tough skin, and it's really hard because these are your babies and you have to send them out. And she quite liked it and sent it back to me, and she mentioned a few things to me, like, okay, so adverbs are not great. I had 2 adverbs in my first sentence, where it's sort of like you're telling the audience rather than showing them what things are happening, what she's feeling, etc. Now, look, I don't follow very many rules in the writing world. If I want to use an adverb, I use an adverb. If I want to tell you that it's autumn rather than show you, I will tell you it's autumn rather than I show you. I don't feel like we need to over-explain everything because that's a rule and you can't do it. But there can be a point where you can overuse those things. So you need to be aware they're there and use them in an appropriate situation. And sometimes you need to know that you're doing things, because all of us have our little ticks. So there's something you have to understand is nobody's a perfect writer and everybody has their little thing. You know, in my first book, I think my characters nodded a zillion times. I mean, they just must have been a bunch of bobbleheads just nodding constantly every time someone said something. And my author pointed it out, my editor pointed it out, and until she did that, I didn't realize that. And then I did like find, you know, you can do find on Word to find nod, and there was like 4 zillion nods, and I realized that my characters both nodded and sighed an awful lot. Think about it in real life. We don't nod and sigh that much. You know, we have a whole range of things. So once you figure out what your little things are that you repeat all the time, like I like to say right now all the time. That's what she was doing right now. It's redundant. You don't need it, you know, obviously. Or I like to say, I was thinking. It's first person. We know that they're thinking that. You know, that's what they're thinking. They just have to say that. They don't have to say I was thinking or I noticed, because we know that that's their point of view. But they were little things that I still do. I still make the mistake. And I've slowly learned to try and take it out. But as I take out one thing, I seem to develop something else I do. That's annoying. But that's the writing process. And you will definitely get better. Look, I've written 12 books now. I've written over 1 million words. And I know Stephen King always said things like, if you need to write at least 1 million words to be able to start to know what you're doing. And I honestly agree with him so much. The difference between my writing when I first started and now is amazing. It's incredible how much you learn, how much you change, how much better you get by doing something a lot. So yes, that's what you have to do. There's no shortcut to writing a book. There's just not. You can't do it in 5 minutes. You can't do it without hard work and discipline. You just can't. I'm not going to say there's no one who ever has, but they're the exception. And you have to think of yourself, most of the time you just have to go with, I'm not going to be the exception to the rule. And just try and, you know, make it as easy a process for yourself as you can. So give yourself the time. Don't rush it. Think things through. Brainstorm with friends and family. Anyone who will listen to you. Guy sitting next to you at the bus stop. So anyway, you read books. How do you think about this idea? You'll never know who will give you a fantastic thought that you never would have thought to put in there, and it can change your whole story. And yes, you have to be disciplined. So this is what I'm saying with writing. And for the people who say that they waffle around a lot and they seem to find themselves jumping from idea to idea, that's where the discipline comes in. Because I have so many ideas, and books do get boring in the middle. Like sometimes with my own books, I'm just like, this is the crappiest storyline I've ever read. Like, honestly, I can't even read it for one more second. It sucks so badly. That's part of the process. Trust me. Most of the time, so as a writer, you can't read your own book objectively. You just can't. It's the same way you can't edit your own book. We'll get into that in the next video. But you can't read it objectively. You can't know whether it sucks or not, and it might. But again, that's something you deal with once the book's finished. Just get it finished. Get the words down. Sit down every day and write it. That's all you can do. If you find yourself getting distracted wanting to do something else, don't. Jot your idea down for your other book in another file because you don't want to forget it, and put it away. Don't start another book. I don't write. I do it a little bit now, but obviously I have a lot more experience now. I do write 2 books at the same time sometimes. Like right now I am writing Max's story, and I'm also writing the 3rd in the Hive trilogy. But that's because I can put the time into it. I'm a full-time author, even though I still full-time care for my daughters. And I still tend to find that can be a little bit more difficult than just focusing. So focus, discipline, it is all part of being an author. You have to think of it as a job. And even when it's hard because you have other jobs, you still have to think of it as a job. Just work hard, because what you're doing now is building the base for the future where you hopefully don't have to work quite so hard. Anyways, alright, so that's part 1, that's writing your story. Any other questions, pop it under the video. I can always do more videos or, just reply to your things. And I'll be back with part 2, which is making it perfect once you've finished your book. Alright, bye.